There we go. All right, good afternoon. It's good to see a full room today. As Jessica said, my name is Stewart Greathouse. Just a few quick words about myself. I was not picked because I'm a nutrition expert, okay? So just to lay that out at the beginning, I'm not a nutrition expert. We actually have folks here at the hospital who've been trained in nutrition, do an excellent job at that, but that is not me. I'm not a specialist or a subspecialist who's done years of training in nutrition as a doctor and treating folks with nutritional medicines and things like that. That's not who I am either, and I'm not a researcher or a scientist, even though we'll talk about a few studies. We'll talk about some of the medical evidence that's out there to support healthy eating. That's not why I'm excited about this topic. It's not because of the professional aspect that I hold, but it's more so because it's part of who I am and it's part of the things that I really enjoy. What I do here at the hospital is I work at a family medicine clinic up in Moss Bluff. I'm a family practice doctor. I see kids from a few months old all the way up into their great-grandparents who may be 80 or 90 years old. So I see the effects of diet over generations and over a long-term lifespan, and that's why I think this is such an important topic. In addition to that, I'm also come from a long line of folks who've worked in the land and have farmed and gardened. I actually consider myself a market gardener. I grow vegetables and fresh produce, and we do berries, pecans that we sell at the Charlestown Farmers Market. We've been going out there regularly for about 6 years now, and my dad and I are beekeepers, and we keep about 40 or 50 hives south of Lake Charles, and we bring that stuff down there to the farmers market as well. So I've had the opportunity to see it from both ends, from the farmers market end as well as from the professional end, and I think that we need to do more to encourage healthy eating habits for everybody and access to good, healthy food. So that's my quick introduction. Let's go ahead and we'll jump in today. Eating healthy in a fast food world. There are challenges with eating healthy, and hopefully some of the things that we're going to cover today will help you deal with some of those things. As we start out, I'm going to give you a quick overview of where we're going to go today. We're first of all going to talk very briefly about the science behind healthy eating. Oftentimes, given enough time, science and common sense come together and they meet up, okay? If we give them enough time. And healthy eating is one of those things where we've actually seen that come true. We have a lot of good evidence-based scientific studies and reviews from folks who spend a lot of time doing research that back up the things that we're going to encourage you to do today. And we're going to talk about that right up front. We're hopefully going to keep that part relatively brief because frankly that's the most boring part of this entire thing, but it's important, okay? After that we're going to talk about some strategies for healthy living, some things that you can incorporate into your own life to help eat better, and then some sources for healthy food. And that's where we're really going to talk about some of the farmers market things, and that'll segue into Ms. Carolyn and Jacob Monso coming up as well. So let's jump right in. When we talk about food, on a biochemical level, we can basically break these things down into three very basic categories. We have carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Okay? These are based on nothing more than the chemical structure of these molecules when we look at them. All right, so on a very basic biochemical structure, this is what we have. These are the things that we ingest that feed our body nutritionally. Our body, when we take in food, breaks them down with enzymes and gives us one of these three categories of things, which we then take and use to build and repair and maintain our bodies. However, that grouping is not the most important thing for us when we talk about a practical level of choosing things to eat. When we talk on a practical level, we're going to talk more along the things of food groups that we're familiar with. And that's what I'm going to kind of use as we talk about the science behind this today. And the groupings that we're going to use are basically the groupings that are based off of the food pyramid. Fruits, vegetables, grains, dairies, proteins, fats, and oils. Most folks are familiar with the old food pyramid that was around for decades, where you had the bottom was your fruits and grains, and it was kind of your base, and then you had grains and cereals and breads. Then after that you had fruits on one side and vegetables on the other. Then you had dairy and proteins, and it kind of narrowed as you got up. And what that kind of did for some of us, it gave us the idea, as long as we get a good base going, we're okay if we don't get any higher. So we just ate plenty of grains and plenty of breads and didn't worry so much about the proteins and the fruits and vegetables. But the new food pyramid that we use helps us understand that no matter what point of the pyramid we're at, we need a balanced diet that includes all of these things. We need both grains, vegetables, fruits, milk, meats and beans, and a little bit, this tiny sliver here, is a very little bit of fats and oils that we are already getting, and so we don't really focus much on incorporating that, but we have to incorporate the other things in our diet. So let's jump right in. Vegetables and fruits. We cannot say enough about the importance of fruits and vegetables in your diet. Now, I know I'm talking to an audience here who probably remembers when you were kids and remember your grandparents and you remember them eating fresh out of the garden and having fresh vegetables and fresh fruits very often. I'm going to tell you today that is not the norm in our culture. Okay? That is very unusual. I have children who come into my clinic who can name their favorite foods off the top 6 fast food restaurants you can give them, okay? But they cannot give you 3 vegetables. Cannot. Okay? And if they do, they're corn and potatoes, which are not actually very healthy as far as vegetables go. Okay? Vegetables and fruits are very important. Your recommended dietary intake of fruits and vegetables together is about 5 servings or about 5 cups a day. When we look at the scientific evidence behind fruits and vegetables, we can see that there is a decreased risk of coronary heart disease and stroke for folks who eat more fruits and vegetables. This is based on a study of 450,000 people in China. Okay? This is an incredibly large study. And they looked at these folks over years. And what they found is that the more fruits and vegetables you ate, the less likely you were to have a heart attack or to have a stroke. There are additional studies out there that actually show that increasing your vegetable and fruit intake will decrease your risk of certain types of cancer. This is shown out particularly true with certain types of breast cancer, and then with some prostate cancer in men, particularly with relative to tomato and tomato-based products. Okay? There's a lot of other research going on about how that affects other types of cancer, but right now the only conclusive evidence we have is on the breast cancer and some of the prostate cancer issues. But we have suspicions that as we continue to do some of these studies, that we're going to see that increasing our diets in fruit and vegetables are going to decrease our risks for certain other cancers. And then at the end, there are other studies. When we pool studies, meaning we take, let's say we've done 10 studies over the past 20 years looking at fruit and vegetable intake, and we take all of those together and look at them as a whole, when we see, instead of looking just at heart attacks or just at strokes or just at cancer, when we look at people dying for any reason at all, if you eat more fruits and vegetables, you are more likely to live longer, regardless of the reason of death. Okay? So fruits and vegetables will help you live longer. Grains. Yes, ma'am. They didn't make a specific delineation in the study. So based on the study, I can't tell you that. We'll talk a little bit more about preparing foods and stuff a little bit later on. But as far as I know, there was not a significant, there wasn't a difference made in the study based on that.
I ask a quick question. I think I know the answer, but it says 4 servings. Does that mean, 5 of each or 5 combined?
5 combined. 5 combined. And generally, you want to weight that more towards the vegetable side than the fruit side. Okay. Grains. This is the second big component of our diet. Recommended intake is about 6 ounces a day. At least half of this needs to be whole grains. Now, this is always a kind of a sticking point, so I want to take a few moments to discuss the difference between regular grains, enriched grains, and whole grains. Most of the grains that we are familiar with are the components that we use to make cornbread, make white flour, make pasta, different things like that. Those are refined grains. Refined grains have been milled to remove fiber, iron, B vitamins, and other nutrients. And we're sitting here and the question comes up, why in the world would we want to do that? Well, to be honest, the reason is that it gives us a product that's easier to use. Okay? So on the industrial scale, when they process food, what they are concerned about is having a product that is the same throughout. And so you don't have clumps of fiber here or this stuff. It's very easy to process. And then you're also worried about shelf life when you're producing food that you're going to ship all over the United States, and we need to make sure that it's not going to go bad in 2 weeks. And so milling that stuff off and removing that stuff gives that product a longer shelf life and basically a prettier appearance. And that's part of the reasons they do those things. Okay? And like I said, good examples are white bread, white pasta, breakfast cereals, and cornmeal. Now, enriched grains are the same as refined grains, except they say, you know what, we need to make sure we have more nutrition, so they come back afterwards and we spray a little bit on there and say, there, that's much better. And that's essentially what happens. Okay? It's good that they add some of that back because we need as much as we can. However, after they've processed the grain, they cannot go back and add everything that they've taken off. Usually what they go back and they add is they fortify it or they enrich it with iron and some of the B vitamins. It's very hard to get the fiber back in there, and fiber is extremely important, as we'll see a little bit later on.
Does Raisin Bran, is the bran a whole grain?
That's one that I don't know about specifically. I would have to actually look at it, and I don't know right off the top of my head, so I wish I could answer that, but I can't right now without looking at it. Okay. Whole grains. Whole grains are those that are not processed extensively or milled. Okay? Good examples of this are going to be oatmeal, brown rice, whole grain bread. These are things that are going to say whole grain on the package. If they are whole grain, they will say whole grain. Okay? This is one of the areas in which the FDA does a pretty good job of making sure that labeling is accurate. And so if you want to eat whole grains, you need to look for that written on the package. And they do make whole grain pastas, they make whole grain breads, many things along those lines. Yes, ma'am?
I don't eat any of that stuff. I only eat rye bread.
Rye bread would be a whole grain the majority of the time.
Only
Yes.
rye bread.
All right, so when we look at whole grains, our whole grain consumption has health benefits when it is consumed instead of your processed grains. So when we take these two and we compare folks who have a diet that is primarily processed grains, and we compare that to someone who has a diet that is primarily whole grains, these are the differences that we see. Whole grain diets tend to lead to a higher incidence of weight loss. Okay? You have a decreased risk of coronary heart disease, which is basically heart attacks. And you have a decreased risk of, once again, death from any cause. When we start looking at all these studies across the board and we put them together and we do an analysis of all of them together, we see that no matter what particular type of cause of death we're looking at, when we look at all that data together, we see that the chances of you living longer are a lot higher when you eat a diet that has primarily whole grains instead of refined grains. Okay? At least half of all grains that you consume should be whole grains, once again. All right, protein. The next component that we have in our diet, the recommended intake is going to be about 5.5 ounces daily. A couple quick notes about protein. The good sources of protein are going to be your lean meats, your seafood, eggs, beans or legumes, plants that are legumes, peas, nuts, and seeds. As we look at the proteins contain amino acids, which are building blocks which our body needs to be able to repair our body and to continue to grow for those of us who are still young and growing. And when we look at these, we see that there is a difference in certain types of protein sources. Okay? One of the big differences comes in with processed meats and red meats. And a lot of you have heard the importance of eating lean meat. There have been some studies looking at red meats and processed meats and comparing those to lean meats such as poultry or fish. And we actually see there is an increased risk of death from heart disease and cancer, and once again, any cause when you have diets that are high in red meats and processed meats compared to lean meats and poultry. Now, interestingly enough, as we're coming around and spending a little bit more time on this, we're finding that that is probably a little bit more weighted towards the processed meat side than it is to just red meats. Okay? So we may find out that the red meat, when eaten minimally processed, is not as bad, but the processing is particularly linked to these problems right here. I'd like to take a quick second and mention fish in particular. Fish consumption, in and of itself, independent of other things, is associated with a decreased risk of cardiovascular disease. Okay? So the amounts that they looked at in the study that I had read was at least 2 servings of fish a week will lead to a decreased risk of cardiovascular disease. Okay? Next, dairy. Recommended intake of dairy is about 3 cups a day. Good sources are going to be any low-fat or fat-free dairy products. Some of the health benefits of dairy in particular is that dairy is going to give us some of the extra vitamins and minerals that we need that we won't always pick up from everything else that we may get, particularly calcium, vitamin D, and protein for the body. There has been some talk about the importance of milk and how important milk is in an adult's diet. There's still some conflicting evidence out there with regards to that. We used to think that a diet very high in either 2% or whole milk led to cardiovascular disease. That has not necessarily proven to be true in the literature yet. So that's something that we're still a little bit up in the air on. One of the things to keep in mind, though, is that you will get a lot of extra fat and a lot of calories from 2% and from whole milk, and that's going to add extra pounds. And so most of us should be careful about drinking a lot of extra milk as we get older, simply because it adds extra weight and leads to obesity. Okay. Fiber. Fiber is actually different from everything else that we've talked about up to this point. Fiber is the component of food that we eat that our body cannot digest to the point that it can take it up. Okay? Your enzymes, which are chemicals in your body that break down food, can break it down to the point that you can absorb a lot of the carbohydrates and a lot of the protein and a lot of the oils that you need and that your body needs, but fiber is what is left over. Okay? Fiber in and of itself has tremendous health benefits. So we should all be striving to increase the amount of fiber that we have in our diet. And this goes back very much to what we're going to talk about a little bit later on, which is the importance of eating foods that are either raw or minimally processed, because you have a lot of that fiber in there. And this, once again, already kind of refers back to the grains talk that we had about already. When you mill that grain, you remove a lot of the fiber and you lose some of the health benefits. So fiber is very healthy. Fiber will, in and of itself, decrease your risk of coronary heart disease and heart attacks. It decreases your risk of diabetes. It decreases your risk of death from any cause. And once again, it may actually be linked to a decrease in incidence of colorectal cancer. Once again, this is one of those things where our scientific studies have not come to consensus yet, and there's still some work to be done, but there are some early signs that we may be seeing a decrease in colorectal cancer in folks who have diets that are very high in fiber. Okay? So just because your body does not absorb the fiber does not mean that it's not important. Very important. Okay? So that's basically the science. That was the boring part. That was the part where I want you to get a little bit, get to a point where you're paying attention now, so you're ready to get excited about getting back and eating a healthy diet. The things that we've talked about so far show us that it is important. It does decrease your incidence of heart attacks and strokes and cancers and leads to healthier living. So let's look at some very basic strategies for healthy living. Okay, these are the four that we're going to come up with, that we're going to talk about. These are some that I came up with. This is based on conversations I've had with folks at the market, conversations with other doctors, reading that I've done. And so some of these, there are no particular order, and they may sound very similar to some things that you have heard other places, but they're repeated here because I think they're excellent. Okay? Number one, choose food that's close to its original edible state. I know that's a mouthful. I'm going to explain that in a second. But when you go out and you purchase food, okay, choose food that you get as close as you can to its original edible state. The less processed a food is, the more likely it is to be healthy for you. Okay? This is a general principle. Okay? That does not mean that this is a rule that is true absolutely every time without exception. There's always exceptions. But as a general principle, the less processed a food is, the more likely it is to be healthy for you. An example for this is apples. Okay? Picking an apple that's closest to its original edible state would be picking a ripe apple off a tree in your backyard at the peak of freshness. You walk out there, you pick it off the tree, you bring it inside, you maybe rinse it off because there may be a little bird poop on there or something. You get that off, you take a big bite, and it's delicious. That's the perfect time to consume an apple. Now we can take the tree, go out there and gather 20 or 30 apples, put them through a press all the juice out, and then we have apple juice. Okay? What happens when we do apple juice is we take all that juice and we concentrate all our sweets in there, and then we throw away everything that we don't need, all the pulp, which is code word for fiber. Okay? And so we have a lot of some of the nutritional aspects of the apple, but we got rid of all the fiber, which can be healthy, and we also concentrated all those sweets in a liquid form, which doesn't fill us up. So we get a lot of those calories from the sugars that are naturally there, but we're still hungry afterwards and we go on to eat something else. Okay? Now, to take this another step further, we could pick all those apples off the tree and we could ship them 300 miles away to a processing factory where they take them and cut them up and put them with high fructose corn syrup, gelatin, and processed grains, and they make a beautiful apple pie and put someone's poor grandmother's name on it, and then ship it 600 miles back across the other way to the opposite coast of the country where it goes into a shelf in a grocery store, and it may stay there for a few days, a week, until one of us come by, pick it up, bring it home to our freezer, and leave it there for a few days or a week until we actually cook it. And so we have the same apple, which potentially had the same nutrition to start with, but an apple in an apple pie is much different from an apple straight off the tree. Okay? So the same thing can be said for chicken. All right? Best way to eat chicken is if you have your own chicken in the backyard, you butcher it, you bring it home, and you put it on the pot, and we can do that. Most of us cannot do that. Most of us cannot do that. Okay? What I don't want you to do is go to the store and see the chicken that's frozen over here on the side and pass that up and go down to the middle aisles where they have the big doors that you open up, and you see a package that says chicken, fingers. I did not even know chicken had fingers. Okay? That should tell you right off the bat it's unnatural, okay? When you take chicken and you cut it into strips and you batter it, What you do is you add all of a sudden processed grains, either cornmeal or other flours, and you add sodium because it often has salt and other preservatives in it. And you take all those things that we don't really need and you add it to the chicken, and all of a sudden something that originally was a good source of protein is no longer an excellent source of protein because of what we've added to it. Same thing can be said for chicken noodle soup. Chicken noodle soup many times is loaded with sodium. Loaded with sodium. Far better to go and pick up a chicken yourself, a fresh chicken from the butcher shop there in your local grocery store, and cook it yourself and make your own chicken soup, okay? That way you have a little more control over what goes in there. So as close as you can to its original edible state. First principle of healthy strategy for healthy eating. Second strategy, go back to the kitchen. I know I'm talking to a generation who probably appreciates the kitchen. People in my generation do not quite so much. Okay? So I need your help to help me encourage your kids and grandkids to get back in the kitchen. Otherwise, I'm going to be a very busy man in 20 years. When we go back to the kitchen, what we find is that we begin making meals from basic ingredients. When we make most of our meals from basic ingredients that we have control over, we start cutting out things that we don't need. Extra sodium that's put in before it ever comes to the grocery store. Extra preservatives, which may or may not be helpful. Extra breading and things that are added to enhance flavor and taste that we may not need. We get those things when we're not preparing the food ourselves. So when you're preparing the food yourself, there are a lot of benefits. The first one is that it puts you in control of what goes into your meal. Okay? If you look at this down below, this is an ingredient list from what I think is a loaf of bread. That's scary. There are a lot of things down there that I even don't quite know how to pronounce. Okay? And so what we need to do is that when you're bringing things home and you're trying to cook with basic ingredients, it gives you a lot more control over what actually goes into your food, so you know. It makes you responsible for the food that you're putting into your body. Instead of assuming that everything that you get from the grocery store is healthy. It's not all healthy. Most of it is safe in the short term, but it's not healthy. Okay? So put yourself in control of what goes into your meals. Secondly, the possibilities are endless. When you go to the grocery store, you have very limited possibilities. What you are limited to is what most everybody else likes. The grocery store is not going to sell something that nobody wants to buy. Okay? So by going to the grocery store and buying pre-prepared meals, you've already limited your possibilities. But when you buy fresh ingredients, you can go home and make that into anything that you want. And that's kind of exciting. I like that. I am not a good cook, but my wife is an excellent cook. And I am constantly bringing home recipes and saying, hey, babe, we need to try this. This looks awesome. And so the possibilities are endless when you're in your own kitchen and doing it yourself. Okay? Lastly, it brings family and friends together. Okay? Food is something that we all have in common. We do. Regardless of race, regardless of color, regardless of creed, regardless of age, we all have food in common. And we should use that to help build community with friends and with our family. Okay? You should ask your grandkids to come over and help cook with you. You should spend time preparing things and help build an appreciation in maybe a younger generation or a friend or a coworker or other family members for food that you can prepare at home that's clean and healthy and fun to do. Okay? So that's the second strategy. Get back in the kitchen. All right. Strategy number 3, stop eating out. Please, please, please stop eating out. I'm going to tell you my general rule. This is the Greathouse rule. This is not necessarily validated by any scientific method. But my rule is 5%. No more than 5% of your meals should be consumed at a restaurant. Max 5%. If you have breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, and you do that for a week, that is 21 meals. 5% is one of those. One a week. And once again, I think that's even stretching it. But if I drop any lower than that, my patients really get upset with me. 5% at most. Okay? Eating out, first of all, is usually more expensive than eating at home. Okay? When you eat at home, you get to save your leftovers. You eat what you need and eat till you have your fill, and you put the rest of it in the refrigerator to save it for another day. You've just split the cost of 2 meals in half. Okay? When you go to a restaurant, what do we do with the extra? We throw it away. And that's money that you've thrown away. Okay, there we go. There we go. So eating out is usually more expensive. But ultimately, eating out gives you little to no control over the ingredients in your food. This harkens back to the point we just got through with, being able to produce your own food in your home, in your kitchen. When you eat out, you have no idea sometimes what goes into that food. At least in a grocery store, you can pick up the package, turn it around, and read that impressive list of 40 ingredients that went into your food. Many times at the restaurant, you have to ask specifically for that list, and sometimes it's very hard to get. Most of us don't know what added sodium is in our food, what added sugars are in our food, what type of refined grains are in our food when they come from a restaurant. Okay? Part of the point of this entire seminar today is to help you understand what's in your food and to make those healthy choices. Okay? So, what's the advantage of eating out? Frankly, it's easy. It's easy. I'm not going to sit here and be a hypocrite and tell you I never eat out. We do sometimes, and we do it because it's easy. It's not usually because it tastes better. My wife is a much better cook than the guy at McDonald's. But we do it because it's easy. So if we recognize that, that helps us to be able to transition into getting away from the restaurants a little bit more, limiting the amount of food that we eat from a restaurant, and start producing it a little bit more in our own home and know what we put into our mouth. Okay. So that's strategy number 3, stop eating out. Strategy number 4, this is one that I think is the most fun. Okay? Try something new. Add variety. Variety in our diet is a natural thing. Okay? It helps ensure adequate vitamin and trace mineral uptake from the foods that we eat. Folks who eat a balanced diet with variety should have no need to take a multivitamin every day. You shouldn't. And there's very good medical evidence to back that up. You should be eating different things. You should not be eating the same thing every day. An interesting illustration of this is bees. I mentioned earlier that I'm a beekeeper. I read a lot of bee literature, and something that we have found is that there's a problem that we see in bees that beekeepers use for transient pollinator services. So what I mean by that is you'll have a beekeeper who has 200 hives, and a farmer in California will call the beekeeper in Florida and say, I really need bees to come pollinate my almond trees. So pack them up on a truck. The guy will send him thousands of dollars. He'll cart them all the way to California and put them out for 4 weeks. And they will stay there in California and go around and pollinate hundreds of acres of almond trees. Okay? When we study bees who do this kind of stuff, we find that they are in general a lot more unhealthy than bees who are kept in one location who go round and round. Part of this is the stress of driving back and forth cross country, but a part of it is the fact that for 4 weeks they eat nothing but almond nectar. They have what we call a monoculture diet. There's no variety, and it's not healthy. It was not part of the way they were designed to function. Okay? We're not designed to function that way either. So we need variety. Variety makes healthy eating an adventure. Okay? I almost hesitate to use the word eating and adventure in the same sentence. That's not something that I usually do, but it can become an adventure. You can try things that you've never tried before. You can try foods that you've never tried before. Try different varieties of things you've never tried before. So try something different. Try a different color. You may actually kind of see over here, this is a picture. In fact, most of these pictures came from our place. This is a carrot, and you're right, it is purple. Okay? Carrots come in purple colors, they come in red colors, they come in yellow colors, they come in orange colors, and most of us don't know that. I didn't know that until recently when I started growing my own carrots several years back. Try a different color. We every year grow tomatoes, and one of our favorite tomato crops is an orange tomato. Okay? Orange tomatoes actually tend to have less acid. They're actually really sweet. They don't have as much of a robust tomato flavor, so they're not really good for salsas and pastas per se, but they're really great for fresh eating. And so when we bring orange-colored tomatoes to the market, if I had $1 for everyone who came up and asked if they were persimmons, I'd be a rich man and go home early. Okay? But we're not used to seeing orange tomatoes. And so they're fun. It's a conversation starter, and it makes going to find food a little bit more interesting. So try a different color of something you've never tried before. Have any of you ever tried purple cauliflower? Okay. Purple cauliflower is great. It looks awesome in a salad. There are very few foods that are naturally purple that taste good. Okay, but cauliflower is one of them. They make varieties of purple cauliflower. Looks incredible in a salad. Okay, try a different color. Try a different recipe. Okay, with the access that we have through the internet nowadays, the recipe possibilities are literally endless. Okay, between Pinterest and other things that are out there, you can come across recipes for almost anything that you've never tried before, or things that you've tried before that you don't care for. I had a lady come up to the farmer's market last week and told me that she loves to make French fries with eggplant. And it's great. She said you don't even necessarily have to fry them. You can bake them. You put them in the batter. And she said she can't make enough of them. Her grandkids eat them before they're even cooled off. Okay? Try a different recipe. Try a different food. This one came home to me about 4 years ago when we started growing spaghetti squash. Who knows what spaghetti squash is? Oh man, y'all are smarter than I was just a few years ago. Because spaghetti squash is a squash that you can take and cut in half, you bake it, and you can use a fork to scrape it out, and it comes out in strands that look like spaghetti. The texture is a little bit different, but you can actually use it as a substitute for pasta. So it's a great food that you can try that's actually a lot healthier for you. You're getting the fiber in there, and you're not getting just the starch that you get from a refined grain, from a normal noodle, and it's great. So try a different food. Get out there and try something new or different. So those are the strategies that we have for eating healthy. So number one, choose something that is as close to its original edible state as possible. Number two, get back in the kitchen and have a good time doing it. Number three, which is the one that we just covered, is stop eating out. And then lastly, try something new. Now let's go on. Once again, there they are in review. Let's talk lastly about the sources. Sources of food for healthy living. This is where it starts to get exciting, okay? Because we can find healthy food in a lot of different places. First of all, well, you can have your local grocery store. Second of all, you can have your own backyard or garden, okay, which is a great one. That's the one I love. This is actually asparagus that we grew in our yard, okay? You can go to a local farm or a CSA, and I'll talk about what that is in a moment, or you can do farmers markets. Okay? Let's jump right in. Local grocery store. For some folks, this may be the only avenue you have for reasons that are beyond your control. You may not be able to make it to the farmer's market when their hours are open. You may not have access to a local farmer. You may not, because of a physical disability, be able to actually garden in your own yard. So maybe the grocery store is the only opportunity that you have. There are some advantages to a grocery store. It is easily accessible and oftentimes more cost effective. I would not say this is the best source necessarily, but it can be a very reliable source for most folks. So don't be ashamed to go to the grocery store to get your food. I believe most of us still frequent them often. Tips when you do go to the grocery store, spend the majority of your time on the perimeter. There is a food guru and author from New York named Mr. Michael Pollan, and he came up with this idea. He said when you go into the grocery store, you'll notice all the food that spoils is on the outside of the store. Okay? So when you walk in, he says head to the left and hang close to the wall until you get all the way back around to the exit, pay for your stuff, and get out of there quick. But what we notice is that the things that do not spoil get put on shelves in the middle of the store. So try to spend more of your time on the perimeter. Go around, hit the fresh fruits in the fresh vegetable aisle, then work your way around to the dairy products, and then the eggs, and then the fresh meats. And then from there, maybe pick up a few staples that you might need in the middle of the store, and then check out. Okay? Talk to your local store manager or produce manager if you'd like to see more organic produce or more local produce or different produce than what they have currently. Ask them. Sometimes they won't stock something because they don't know people like it. Spaghetti squash was that way when it first came out, and I use that one because that's one I'm a little bit familiar with. But when it first started to become a popular food, folks would go to a grocery store and couldn't find it because the produce managers there didn't know people wanted to buy it. If they know you want to buy it, sometimes they'll start stocking it, and you can actually get it there at the grocery store. And lastly, please, please, please avoid sweetened beverages. I could have put this anywhere in here. I stuck it here because it's in the grocery store, but please don't. The best thing to drink is water. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you're going to drink a fluid regularly, it needs to be water. Okay. All right. Next source, your own yard or garden. Okay. There are a lot of advantages to this. First advantage, it's a convenient location. You can put this right out your back door. In fact, I know a gardening author, and he proposes that you put it somewhere between your car and your front door so you literally have to trip over it on your way out. That's not feasible for most of us, but he makes a good point. Put it somewhere where it's easy to watch, it's easy to tend, it's easy to pull the occasional weed, and it's easy to pick the fruit when it's ripe. Most of us are people who naturally shy away from things that are hard. It's just the way we're programmed. If you make it easy, it's going to be that much better, and you will be able to get more fruit and more production out of your garden. Okay? It encourages physical activity. Okay? I'm going to make a brief kind of parenthetical statement here. I realize that there are some of you who may be very limited in the amount of physical activity that you can do. Okay? So I know that a half-acre garden is not possible for most of us in this room.
okay, because of physical limitations, okay? But any physical activity, getting outside and looking at things is helpful. And you can always do small things. You can do 3 or 4 potted plants on a patio or on a porch in an apartment home or a balcony. Find somewhere where you can plant something where you live, okay? If nothing else, it helps give you a greater appreciation for the food that you do eat, okay? And then lastly, an advantage of this is it gives you the most control over your food source. Out of all the food sources that we're going to talk about out there, this is the one that gives you the most control, okay? You're the one who controls what goes on the plants. You're the one who controls what the plants eat. You're the one who controls who's picking the food. You control how it's handled after it's picked. You have the most control, and that ultimately is probably one of the best ways to ensure the freshest produce and the safest produce you can get. Okay? So the great ideas for your own backyard or your own garden. Chickens and eggs. Okay? Most towns or cities will have restrictions on chickens to an extent. Usually that's limited to a number of chickens, and it often will not allow you to have roosters in the city limits. Okay? Chickens cluck, roosters crow. At midnight, at 2 in the morning, at 4 in the morning, when they're sad, when they're happy, roosters crow all the time. Because of that, they oftentimes don't allow you to keep roosters. The good news is that roosters don't lay eggs, so we're not that concerned about them anyway. But you could get 2 or 3 hens, keep them in your backyard, and then have fresh eggs every day. Another idea is garden. Yes, sir?
Guess what Governor John Bell Edwards just built right outside the governor's mansion?
Well, what's that?
A chicken coop.
Well, good.
He raises his own chickens.
I think that's great. I think that's great.
These next.
He might. He might. All right, gardens are another great way to do this. You don't have to have a tremendous amount of space to have a garden. We do basic market gardening, and we grow everything we grow on 1/4 of an acre or less. 10,000 square feet. We've measured it out. Okay? And so that's what we grow. Now, we don't produce a tremendous amount of produce, but we produce a lot during the season. Okay? Gardens are a great way. Vining plants or bushes. Do you have that chain link fence in your yard that's just sitting there and kind of ugly? Plant some blackberries along that. Okay? Plant grapes. Snap beans you can plant. They'll vine up. Muscadines is another thing you can plant. Okay? There are a lot of fresh things that you can plant, and the things about berries and muscadines and grapes, those are things you only have to plant once. They come back year after year after year. In fact, sometimes they can be a headache if you decide to get rid of them. But plant vining plants or bushes. Okay? Another thing, fruits and nut trees. Okay? We're really blessed where we live right here that we can actually grow really good citrus. Okay? Limes, lemons, oranges, satsumas, and they actually will start producing pretty soon. My wife and I planted a first lemon tree in our yard about 2.5 years ago. We picked 50 lemons last year. Okay? And so you can, don't get caught in the trap of thinking if I plant a tree, it's going to be 3 decades before I pick anything off of it. Okay? Because that's not necessarily the case. If it's a pecan tree, it might be 2 decades. It might be a while. But there are other trees you can plant and you can get produce off of them. Okay? The possibilities are literally endless. Pears, persimmons, plums, even mulberries. There are a lot of things out there. So plenty of ideas for things you can do in your own yard or your own garden. Okay. Next one, a local farm or a CSA. So this is outside the constraints of a farmer's market. This is where you actually go to someone's house and you pick up food. Okay? And they're a farmer. A CSA, how many of you have heard this term before, CSA? Okay? I see a few people, actually some of my customers from the farmers market know that term. CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. That's actually something that's very popular up north. Okay? It is not quite caught on, at least in this area of the country down south. That is where it's actually a subscription service where you pay a farmer ahead of time, let's say $400, and you get a share of his harvest for 2 months or 3 months out of the year. And every month you go pick up a box and you have a guaranteed fresh food supply. And so that's the idea of a CSA. It's partly buying in with the farmer, so you really partner with the farmer. So you know that if it's a great year, you may get extra produce. If it's a really bad year, you may not get as much, but you're supporting someone locally who's trying to grow fresh and healthy food for you. And that's a neat way to do it. Unfortunately, we don't have any of these in the immediate area that I know of right now. But we do have several local farmers who you can actually get in contact with and who sometimes will sell things out of their home. Okay? Advantages, often your quality here is very, very high. Okay, if you're going to a local farm, you have a professional food grower who's selling their produce to you at the peak of ripeness because they didn't have to pick it 3 weeks early and send it to a factory to be processed. Okay, so it's very, very high quality. You can build long-term relationships with this farmer. He may allow you to experience the farm. There are some places I know of farmers who've had folks come out and let them picnic in the field. You can come out and help every once in a while depending on what the situation is. I know I've had folks come out when we harvest honey and they'll pitch right in and help us harvest honey. They wanted to see how it was done and we said, come on. You can stay inside where you don't get stung and then we'll bring it inside and we'll put you to work, okay? So you may actually get an experience there that you hadn't planned on. Tips. Talk to your neighbors or coworkers to find a reliable farm or a CSA in your area. Okay? Word of mouth is excellent with this. You want to talk with someone who's dealt with that person before. Another great resource is this website right here, localharvest.org. Okay? You can go on there, type in your zip code or your state and your city, and they will show you lists of farms that have joined that group and that are open for the public to sell either at certain times of the year or with certain produce. Okay? Localharvest.org. Great resource there. Okay? All right. And I'm sorry, I had to throw a chicken picture in there. All right. So you may find this on your local farm when you go out there. These are actually broiler chickens that are being raised on pasture. They're moved every day to fresh pasture. So new bed of grass every day. We don't leave them in their feces for more than 24 hours. They move right on. And it takes them 8 weeks to grow out, and you have fresh chicken. That actually we do. That we don't do on the 1/4 of an acre. The garden's on a 1/4 of an acre. But believe it or not, we've run them in our yard before. It makes the grass beautiful. All right. Farmers markets. This is, I think, is one of the best sources, and it's one that we actually have around here. The advantage, the quality, once again, is often very high because you have someone who loves to do this, is very good at it, and they're bringing it down for you. You have more variety to choose from in one location. This is an advantage over dealing with one farmer. When you go to the farmer's market, you have several farmers or growers or gardeners getting together, and you have a little bit more variety and things to choose from. So I may not grow celery, but Mrs. Johnson down the road may grow celery. I may not grow lemons, or I may not bring peaches, but Mr. Presley comes every summer and brings gobs of peaches. And so you have more variety when you're in a farmer's market. Another great advantage of the farmer's market is that it builds relationships and community. Okay? This doesn't speak particularly to physical health, but it's great for mental and emotional health. And we know that. Okay? It's good to get out, to meet people and develop friendships. Okay? And farmers markets are great places to do this. I have dear friends who I never see anywhere but the farmers market. Okay? And they're dear and close friends, and I enjoy it. And that's one of the things that I personally love the most about the farmers market. All right, tips. These are things to keep in mind when you go to the farmers market. Ask these questions just because we want you to be someone who's informed and knows what they are buying. Ask where the products came from. Most farmers markets are going to have certain rules in place to keep people from buying a truckload of melons out of Mexico and bringing it up and selling it as their own. Okay? But it never hurts to ask. Never hurts to ask. Ask where their products came from. The vast majority of products at the farmer's market here locally are grown by the person who brought them or by another local farmer. Okay? Ask about their production methods. This means, how do you grow this? Do you use herbicides or pesticides? Are you organic? Are you not organic? Do you weed it all yourself? Do you use mulch? Ask questions like that. A farmer will talk your ear off all day long if you start asking these questions. Okay? They get excited about that sort of stuff. But it allows you to know and understand a little bit better. And it's going to make you a better gardener when you get home to tend to the plants that you have. Okay? Learn how to grow some of your own. This is one of the best. You can go to a farmer's market, and I have never met a vendor or a seller at a farmer's market who did not want to tell you and help you grow better vegetables yourself. They all do. In fact, that's usually what I get stuck talking about when folks come up. I say, well, we did this year, and we did this year, and I share these things with my customers all the time. I tell them, I learn every year new ways not to do things. Okay? But you share your failures, you share your successes, and that education goes a long way. So, farmers markets, fresh produce. This actually came out of our garden 2 weeks ago. So, and these are all tomatoes, by the way, multicolored, and the popular spaghetti squash. All right. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica. I believe we were going to let Miss Carolyn and Jacob come on up and help us answer a few questions.
One thing, I don't know whether you can answer that. Why is it that organic food costs more if they're not using all these insecticides and all? Why does it cost more?
That's a very good question. organic food, first of all, the process of certifying for organic is expensive. Okay, it involves it's a cost initially up front of several hundred to several $1,000s. Okay, because you are not buying chemicals, you would think that you would save money, and you do save a little bit there. But the alternative then is because we don't use chemicals, we have to use other things to keep weeds down, and we have to use other sources of nutrition instead of chemical fertilizers. So the other sources of nutrition either require a lot of work to get onto the garden, and so therefore it's more cost because the farmer can't do all the work himself, so he has to hire extra help to do that, or he has to hire extra help to keep weeds down. So if I don't spray my crops with Roundup, what I have to do is go through with a hoe and hoe everything, or do what I do and I try to bury the whole thing under mulch. But that's extra time, and extra time translates into extra cost because you have to hire extra folks to help you do that stuff. And then the other thing to remember is that sometimes your organic production methods may not get the volume of produce that you get with traditional agriculture. Usually your quality is higher, and you may get better flavor, but you don't get the volume. All right? So there's more value in it, but it costs more to produce organic produce. Okay?